So John has asked us to talk about why advocacy is important. And I think we're going to do that from both a personal and an organizational point of view. And the personal, well, it's a story that each of us has in the room. And my story started as being the oldest of 5 Irish children. And my first big Washington experience happened when I was 8 years old. It was 1958, so you can count. And my parents we had relatives in Bethesda, and we would come down to DC and visit. So one time we were touring the Capitol. And I don't know how many of you have gotten to take that little subway under the Capitol that goes from the House to the Senate. It's a cool ride. If a staff member wants to be nice to you tomorrow, you can ask, and they will escort you. But in those days, you could just go. It was, not a security issue or anything. So there I am with my parents. We get in the little subway. My brother, Michael, is a year younger than I am, and he's a lot more fun. I'm like the serious, studious one. And we get in this little subway car, and my father sits up, and this guy gets in the car, and it's John F. Kennedy, the senator. And my parents, being these Irish Catholics who can't wait to see him become president, are so excited that although I'm only 8 years old, I remember it. I have it. It's not a visual memory. It's kind of a half made-up memory. But it was something that meant a whole lot to me. My brother eventually ended up getting a law degree, a criminal justice degree, and working for the DA's offices in the Bronx and Brooklyn. But depression struck him and took him from us pretty violently, as all of us have experienced. So though I was a politically inclined person from the start, and Bob and I talk about this often, that experience made me combine my personal and my volunteer activity in a special way. And that's what advocacy is. That's what Tuesday is about. You're taking the loves that you lost to the Hill with you. And you're going to walk the halls, and you're not going to trip the senator or representative, but you're doing what the Latin is, advocare, which is you are on behalf of, you are a sponsor for. So one of the reasons I came to AFSP was to do this. And when I first came to AFSP 20-some years ago, before Bob, I want you to know.
BB, yes, BB.
BB, before Bob. We didn't do that work. We did wonderful work. We did research, we did education, we did training. But we were missing that really vital part. And in my professional life, my firm had lobbied in Massachusetts for the AIDS Action Project and Project ABLE, which is related to AIDS. So I saw what the HIV/AIDS community had done, and I knew that it was possible for us. Enter AFSP, and Bob's going to talk about the decision we made to do the advocacy that way.
Great, thank you, Nancy. You can see why Nancy's the head of our organization. What she brings in terms of her passion is just unbelievable. My story is a little different. I was shaped by the 1960s. And the marches on Washington and all of the upheaval of the 60s and how we were going to change the world. And and then you get into the world and you realize it's not so easy to change the world. You have to figure out how to do it, And I think, fast forward to coming to AFSP, well, I'm here about 2 weeks and I get a phone call from Jerry Wyrack. How many people know Jerry Wyrack? Okay, a few, not too many anymore. Well, Jerry and Elsie Wyrack founded SPAN. You heard John mention it. And that was the Suicide Prevention Action Network. And they were formed really to get engaged in policy work, in advocacy. And we didn't have that. And coming here, and I worked in other nonprofits where there was that kind of an arm, in terms of trying to change policy. I wonder why we don't in suicide prevention. Why aren't we doing this? And I read a report, 1998 report by the World Health Organization, which said if you want to prevent suicide, you have to do 3 things. One is you have to invest in the research. You have to know what you're doing to be able to prevent this. And so science. 2, you have to educate. People have to know, they have to learn about this. And that was spelled out in that report as well. But the 3rd thing was political will. You have to generate political will to create the change that you want. Because policies and legislation can be very helpful to achieving the mission of preventing suicide loss. And it can also work against you if it's not the right policy. So from that very early experience, I was like, we have to do this. However, we were a research organization, and that was a bit of a cultural change for many of the folks on our board at the time. But I always had it in the back of my mind, someday we need to bring this to bear as a part of AFSP's mission as well. So fast forward to 2009, there was an opportunity to bring SPAN USA and AFSP together, and through some wonderful people on the SPAN board and the AFSP board, we managed to make that happen. And why was that important? Well, SPAN was a very small but very effective group here in the Capitol. In the Beltway, they were well known, and they did some great things. But they had no reach to all of you. The whole army of advocates waiting to be tapped. And we had that through our chapters and all the people walking and everything, and realized if we could put these two together, how much more powerful we would be, and that's happened. And that also led to, just a shout out, to hiring John and Trevor and Nicole and Liz. You know, we wouldn't have them if we didn't have a policy office and a policy arm. So that's how we got to this point.
And another shout out to our Washington office. In the 7 years, going on 8 years, that this office has been in place, AFSP has become a go-to organization in Washington at the White House and the House and Senate. So thank them. The work is many hours. There's a lot of passion. But we wouldn't be where we are today without them. So thank you, John, Trevor, everybody. So you can see why we hold meetings like this. They're a lot of work, but they do a couple of really important things. First, you understand, if this is your first time, what we're asking for, what we need to do, where we need to go. And one thing I like to remind people is we own those buildings, you and I, up on the Hill, and those folks work for us. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to be nice and polite and ask the way we should, but remember that you should feel confidence when you walk those halls. You're bringing the loss that you suffered, but you're also bringing hope for other people so they won't be in the position that you're in. So it's really important for us to tell our stories. And really, that's what advocacy is, I think. It is hope and experience wrapped up in a way that is going to become good public policy. And then once we get the good public policy, we're not finished, because laws need regulations to be implemented. So that's another reason why we have a Washington office, because once we get the laws and the money that we want, it's like Patrick Kennedy saying parity, mental health parity is a good thing, but who's really doing it? We've got to look at the data. So it's a complex package, but it starts with your story. So when you go up there, if you haven't before, I hope you have first of all, I know you're going to be well prepared. You'll be tired by the end of today, but I guarantee you, when you go up on the Hill tomorrow, you'll be really excited. I have to say, the first time I saw John McCain walk the halls, I said, "Oh my God, look how small he is!" You know, you see people on TV, and they look like, "Oh my God," you know. Now there are some people who are big. I'm not, you know, and he's a great guy. It's just like you walk by in the hall and you go, "Oh." So I hope you have a moment like that, a frisson like that. But at the same time, you will be well prepared. You'll know what you're doing, right? I mean, this is why we do these events, Bob. Right?
Yeah, that's why this meeting's important, because we want you to go there and feel comfortable. You know, people ask, well, what's the one thing, you know, you would advise people? It's be yourselves. You are here because you're passionate. You've been personally affected in some way by this. You know, that's really the power of this. And, you know, paid lobbyists go and do this kind of stuff, but they're paid. And the members know it, and their staff know it. But when volunteers like all of you go, and you're so passionate, and you tell your stories, they understand that too. And I will also say, more than likely, they have a story. And, you know, we know from the research, you know, at least half, and some studies show 80% of us will know someone who's died by suicide or who struggles. And so, you know, they know this too. And they may not share it, but they know it. And so by being yourselves and being passionate and telling your stories, it's going to resonate. This is not, you're not reading from the script, you're reading from your heart. But you need to be prepared too, so, you know, just be relaxed. And I know you probably did this last night, I'm sorry I missed it, but I know many of you are new and have not done this before. Just relax. They are human beings like all of us. So, I think, I'm not totally sure, but I think they are. But, and so, you know, just be yourselves and let your passion and what you really feel come out.
Right, because one time we were at an office of a Massachusetts congressman, and one of the staff people offered to take us down the hall to a shortcut to where we're going. Well, you know, shortcuts, you'll find out, in these buildings are very long. It's like a New York Avenue. You know, it takes a long time. And we're talking and talking and talking, and we get to the door of the elevator, and she's not pressing the button, and I'm wondering why she's not pressing the button. And of course, it strikes a second before she said it that her daughter had attempted, and she was so glad we were there in the building. She doesn't talk about it in the office, but thank God we were there doing it. So there will be stories like that. If you don't hear them directly, know that they're in the building, and that's why one of the reasons for that. The other thing I want to mention is that what you learn here and tomorrow, you should bring back to your states, because as we talked about last night, state capitol days, the state houses are a little smaller. John McCain probably won't be there, but what you learn will enable you to do this locally, you know, to stop by, or in your district. You know, your congressman and your senator probably have local office hours. You can just drop by and say who you are, what you care about, what's important to you, and oh, by the way, we have an office in Washington. If they need any information about mental health, we're happy to help them. If they're working on legislation that we can sponsor, you know, we'll be there. We're a national organization. You know, there are things that, that you can take back to your state that are really important. So the other thing we want to talk about is Project 2025 and what this kind of activity means to supporting it. Maybe you should define it
Yeah, but I think
first.
everyone knows we've set this bold goal to reduce the U.S. suicide rate within 10 years by 20%, maybe 25, 20%. And, you know, you say, well, how are we going to get there? You know, it's been trending up, not like this, but trending up. How do you bend that curve and bring it down? So one of the things we've done is this analysis, which looks at who are we losing? Where are we losing them? How are we losing them? And what we're finding from that analysis is these areas of real opportunity to make some change in how services are delivered in healthcare settings, about firearm safety, and trying to educate firearm owners about suicide risk and what to do. So things like that that we think, if implemented on enough of a scale, you know, and that's the key thing, it has to be done in a broad enough way, we can actually then impact suicide and save lives. So, but you know, how does policy fit into that? Because some of this is, you know, is training, let's say, of healthcare professionals, how to identify people at risk, what to do. Well, guess what? You can have policy change to increase those standards of care, or to increase the mandated training in suicide prevention of various healthcare workers. These are policy issues. And frankly, as we looked at all the things we are going to lay out, and we'll be announcing this very formally in September during Suicide Prevention Week, we realized a lot of this is policy change. You can drive these things, and you could do it slowly through states, one at a time, which we're going to do, and you can also try to do it nationally and make it happen that way. So it's very exciting because I think policy is at the core of this. We have to increase how care is delivered in emergency departments and in primary care and in behavioral health care. And I think we can drive some real strong change. It may take time, but I think the policy message here is change can happen either through legislation or working with licensing groups and so on to create the change we need to be able to find people at risk, treat them, follow up, do all the right things so we can save their lives. I think we're on to something. You'll hear more about it, but policy is at the core of this Project 2025 and our goal of reducing the suicide rate 20%.
So when I became chair, I said to Bob, I have to do something that's really going to make a difference. I don't want to be chair for 3 years and not see something really substantive. Well, of course, seeing all of you here is pretty substantive, so that's pretty exciting. But 2025, I think, is really significant. But the thing about change is I've always thought it's kind of like losing weight. You say, I lost weight, but you didn't lose weight. You fought and you struggled, and it took a lot longer than you thought, and there was some sacrifice, and there are all these hard things about it. In the end, it's wonderful. But change is like that. People don't want it to happen, and it's hard for it to happen, especially when you have leadership so divided and in the midst of an election campaign and people focusing on other things. That's okay. We're here for the long haul. We're not going to go away. And that's an important message, calmly, that what happened to us, thank you, I see it, what happened to us is something we will never forget, and it moves us, and we're going to act on it regularly. And so my tip to you tomorrow about what's important tomorrow is, as Bob said, relax, but enjoy yourself. In our Massachusetts crew, what we often do is, one of us takes the lead in a couple offices, and I remember last year by the end of the session, I could barely speak. So then we would rotate and someone else would take the lead. So that's a good thing, and share it. And what's a really important thing to take away from this experience? Take away what you learned, keep it in your heart, and go back and work like hell to make a difference wherever you live, because that's what we have to do. That's what we've learned. We just can't let up. We've got to really keep at it. I wanted to share, I didn't give her a heads up on this. I love Facebook because just because I keep track of my AFSP family. Michelle Toman wrote this on Facebook. She said, and this is a definition of advocacy. In the year my brother should have celebrated his 40th birthday, we passed a law they named after him instead. That's advocacy.
There's one more thought I'd like to share with you, and that is, when we started to really try to build this whole advocacy effort and create what is in fact a movement, lots of people said, well, you know what, this is different. This is not like, you mentioned HIV, or this is not like breast cancer. And they applied that to the walks, to advocacy. People are just never going to get involved in the kinds of numbers and ways in this field that they do in other fields. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And what we have seen is a groundswell of people everywhere getting involved. And you're the tip of the iceberg. But there's so, and you know this from your states and so on, there's so many more people ready to get involved, to talk about their loss, their lived experience, someone in their family who's struggling. They want to speak about it in ways that didn't exist 10 years ago. And we're on to something. And Nancy said, we're not going to go away. It's sustainable, it's growing, it's powerful, but we have to use it. It's not enough to say, okay, look at all the people. How are we using that? And I think that's where we are as a movement, and you're really leading it. And I think that we're on to something, and that's going to create the change. It may happen next year, 5 years, or 10 years, but it's going to happen because we're not going away. And I think that sustainability and that growth and inviting people to join with you in your communities, and we'll do it nationwide, that's changing everything, and that will bring down the suicide rate. So I thank you for that, because we are a movement. You are a movement. Thank you.
I think we got our zero.
Zero. We're out of time. Oh, no, questions. That's
We're
a cue.
almost there, but I think what I'd like to do, we should have done this at the beginning, but since Bob and Nancy are sitting up front, how many of you are here because you're survivors of suicide loss? Okay. How many of you have a lived experience? Okay. How many are mental health professionals that are here because of professional reasons? Great. So when we opened the office 8 years ago, it was pretty much survivors of suicide loss. And now as we look at the numbers of the field advocates, it's now, Nicole, am I off base, 60-40? More people with lived experience, or people who are living with a mental illness but want to be part of the world. And that's really cool, because we've now done 2 years in a row a lived experience panel, one last year on the House side and this year on the Senate side. And it's so amazing for people who considered killing themselves, tried, didn't succeed, and are here to articulate why they did what they did. And the Hill staff, no one walks away without some new insight into life and why mental health is no different than physical health. And you all are going to help, as to Bob and Nancy's point, going to change the dynamics. And I think, again, all the speakers you're going to hear today, every one of them contribute in some way. So you're going to meet new friends, and it's going to be fantastic. Any questions? The interns get any questions on index cards? Any other questions? Hold up. Great. Got one in the front here. right, this is great questions. Nancy, how helpful would it be to schedule follow-up meetings with members in their district offices?
It would be wonderful. It's a really good idea because as we have become the face of suicide prevention in DC, at the state level or your community level, you want to be in the same position. So it would be wonderful to do that. And I actually stay in touch with my Congress people and a lot of people I make appointments with throughout the year. I check in with them. I'll send them an email. They get so many emails, they don't answer right away. But I always find that eventually someone will write back. I just want to be on their radar, you know. So it's a great question. And if you can do it, it's terrific. Usually if you go to the Congressperson's website, it'll say when the local hours are. The other thing that I would suggest is the other way to make yourself known is to volunteer, to do some, you know, campaign work or to volunteer in the office or if they're doing some special event. And if you're in a position to do so, donate, because we all know that money draws attention. If you can do that, it's wonderful. But just simply visiting the office is a great first step.
Great. And I think the other thing, to Nancy's point, if you haven't already gone to your U.S. representative or your congressperson's website and signed up for their email newsletters, do so. And do the same thing with your 2 senators. And then they often have district town hall meetings. They really encourage you. Those are the times that they come home and they really try to get input from their constituents. And they're more relaxed. They're not as harried as they are here in Washington. So again, think long term about developing relationships, because we have something new. You'll hear more about it on Wednesday in the breakout sessions, but we have something called the Field Ambassador. And those are people who are more involved with their chapters, but also want to have a higher level involvement with their congressperson or their 2 senators. So that we want to identify people that may already know their senator or someone that wants to get to know them. So if you already know them, that's really great. But if you don't, we'll work with you, almost like coaching you for the Out of the Darkness walk. We'll coach you on ways to get to know your senators. Okay. Bob, this is a question for you, and Nancy too. What has been the biggest accomplishment from merging with SPAN USA?
You know, you could look at it in the short run, which is there's been a number of bills, military suicide prevention and so on, that have happened. I also want to look at it in the long term, because again, going back to the fact that since that merger, this meeting happened, there were like 30 people. You know, now look at it. We could have had, you know, 1,000 more people. And so I think the biggest benefit is we're building something for the long haul. And again, back to the fact that it's sustainable and it's growing. But in the short run, there's been some great legislation passed. And I will tell you, I don't think even in the heyday of SPAN, and this is not a criticism, it was a fledgling starting group, but how we are known by the administration, by every department here in Washington, and you'll see that, and some are going to join us later today, and by the staff and the members. I mean, our presence is so much greater, and this issue is so much more on their minds. Now, some of that's because of us, some of it we're impacted by in a positive way, because sadly, there's been more discussion of the issue too, you know. So, but all of that, I think, is really as a result of the merger in many ways.
Yeah, and you know, we are a research-based organization, and that has gone into the policy side as well, because I've gone, last year I went into a couple offices, and when I said where I was from, they said, oh, well, we talked to Trevor, or we get the best information from your offices. So that's really important. We're trustworthy, you know, we're telling people what's really happening. And then I have become a true convert to the National Violent Death Reporting System, NVDRS, and I hope you all will too, because the first year that we came up on the Hill, you know, no one knew us, the issue wasn't that high priority. And a lot of people said to me, well, how do you know what's happening? I said, if you fund this system, the NVDRS, across the nation, you will know, and you're the leader, and you should know. So, I mean, the things we've learned, who knew I would be carrying NVDRS around in my pocket?
All right, here's a follow-up question. What's been the biggest obstacle to an integrated suicide prevention effort? That sounds a little bit public policy, a little bit recent. I mean,
Yeah,
sort of...
and we're going to probe that a bit later today in a panel with many of our federal partners. I think, you know, these departments are created to be silos, and that's unfortunate. However, I will say this, I have learned that they are starting to work together in ways they never did before, and that's really a positive. Because at the end of the day, the folks in these departments care about this. And so we are starting to see more integration. Probably the biggest problem is the funding, A, is too small, for sure, for something, you know, such a leading cause of death. And two, it almost forces them to work with blinders on because it's so narrow in its purpose and how the legislation and the appropriations are written. But I think we're starting to overcome the working together. We have to overcome the money. There's money. It's not coming to us, and it's time it does. Cannot ignore this anymore is the message we have to say loud to our representatives. There's money. We have to start to see it appropriated for us.
Absolutely.
Bob, I think you just touched on this, but what efforts are being made to partner with some of the high-risk groups like firefighters, police, military, et cetera, for Project 2025 and to reduce suicide 20%?
You know, the strategies, the goal is to improve the delivery of care, let's say, in emergency departments. And so who touches on that issue? Certainly people in emergency medicine, who, by the way, get like zero training in suicide risk assessment, you know? So right there, you know, there's a partnership waiting to happen, right? We have to work with that field, with the professionals in that field. Some of the other things like firearm safety, we have to partner with groups that are training people with firearms. What a great partnership, right? Because they can include suicide prevention in that training. And what better time when someone is a new gun owner to teach them about this, what to do if someone in your family or you know, are not doing well. That gun is dangerous in the hands of someone at risk. So we can partner with a lot of groups. I think the most important partnership are some of our sister organizations, both private and also government, because we can't do this alone. We knew that going into this, Project 2025, that it was too big for us to do alone, and we have to partner, whether it's with the Action Alliance or other sister organizations. These are the partners. Zero Suicide Movement is a great partnership because it fits so well with what we found, and they're doing a great job. So I think there's all these partnerships nationally, but also in your communities. And you know who they are in your communities, and that's part of the strategy as we roll this out, how you can work with partners in your town. We don't own this. Our country owns this, and we need to get everybody working on this together.
And that's why we created an advisory committee that went across the silos. We brought all these people together in DC and sat down and talked about it so they would be part of the thinking and the strategy and be behind it. And to a woman and man, they are, yeah. And when we roll it out, we hope that we'll have the same reaction from all of them.
All right, here's the last question. Put your imagination caps on. It's January 21st, 2017. I get a phone call from the new White House that the new president, he or she, wants to hear from our leadership. What would the three of us tell the new president in the Oval Office about mental health and suicide prevention? We'll have about 15 minutes with him or her.
Money, money, money.
Yeah. How many people have seen Jerry Maguire? Show me the money.
I mean, if you look at that sheet in our folders, when you spend money on health diseases, the incidence goes down. Let's bend the curve. Let's spend some money. It's about policy, but it's about research and investing, right, Bob?
Totally agree with Nancy's comment. I think the one thing I would add is that the cost to our country in terms of human toll it takes on everyone, we know that, what happens in the aftermath of a suicide loss, 150 people affected by each loss, you know, school systems, our military, you know, workplace, families, but also financial cost. If nothing works in terms of caring about this from a human point of view, we have to make the case from a dollars and cents point of view. You know, rough estimates, it's like over $40 billion a year, the cost of suicide in our country. It's probably significantly more. So, you know, this is the kind of case we're going to need to make because, like it or not, we are competing for funds. They're there, but we do have to make our case.
Okay, we will. All right.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you very much.